Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Nicholas Kaufman, who is a horror author. And Nicholas, I'm going to just let you explain what it is that you write and basically let you describe a little bit more about it.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
you're welcome.
Um, I do write horror. I've always loved horror, even as a kid. I remember watching, the old Universal horror movies on television, and it always lit up my imagination. I was so fascinated by the creature from the Black Lagoon and Frankenstein's monster and all that stuff. And so that's naturally what I gravitated towards when I started writing as well. So I've done a lot of supernatural horror. I've done sort of just thriller horror. I've done science-based horror. I've done all sorts of horror. I don't know. I guess I just love horror.
There are so many different kinds of horror. It's amazing. You've been finding out these things, or I've been finding out these things as I've been talking to people, that,
It's true, yeah. There's so many different kinds of horror from all sorts of different subgenres, and I enjoy playing in all of those different sandboxes as well. I think I would probably get bored if I was just writing about vampires or just writing about serial killers or something like that.
right. So, what can readers expect from your latest book?
Oh, can I show you what my latest book is?
Please do.
Okay, so this is The
That's
Mind Worms. This came out earlier this year in 2024. It's the third book in the Doctor Laura Powell series, which is a series that follows a small town medical examiner in the Hudson Valley who comes across sort of horrific medical mysteries. And I call them science-based horror thrillers because I'm not good at singling out a single genre, I guess. Um, so this is the third one, and it is, I don't mind telling people or warning people, it's the most gruesome of the three. They
it
all have a
is.
certain they all have a certain level of gruesomeness to them because we're dealing with medical issues and autopsies and strange events happening to people's bodies. But this one really gets kind of gory.
Yeah.
But the good news is that all of the books are pretty much standalone adventures. They're standalone stories. The only thing that continues from novel to novel are the evolving relationships of the characters. Um, so if you like gory, gruesome stuff and want to jump right to this book, I wouldn't stop you. Everything you need to know is in there. But all of the books are like I said, they stood alone pretty well.
So, what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
I think one of the reasons this particular series has been as popular as it is because all of the science in the books is real. I wanted to make sure that I was presenting real, actual science uh, in the framework of these sort of horror thrillers. So I do a lot of research,
So, I was going to
and
ask you.
yeah, oh yeah, research. It has become my favorite part of the whole process. I really fall down the rabbit hole with research. Um, but in the third book, for example, I did a lot of research on parasitic wasps and how they impregnate caterpillars with their larvae and what happens next, and then extrapolate that towards really what would happen if it happened to a person instead of a caterpillar. And I studied also prehistoric wasps. They found a prehistoric wasp a few years back, preserved in amber. It's very Jurassic Park. Um, but it's a wasp, obviously, instead of a mosquito. And it was just completely. They were able to determine that it was of the wasp family, but it was completely different from anything we know as a wasp. It didn't have wings. It had almost grasshopper-like back legs, so it would sort of leap at its prey rather than fly. And it had a terrible dagger-like serrated stinger at the base of its abdomen. So that was just absolutely horrifying. And me being me, that sort of got me going and like I found that really exciting and wanted to find a way to use it.
Huh. Okay. So, was that the inspiration that you had for
It
this book?
for this particular one, yes, there's each of them had their own bizarre scientific, like weird science inspiration. The first book is called The Hungry Earth, and that one really came out of my reading about parasitic fungi. in a great book called Entangled Life by Dr. Merlin Sheldrake, which is the best name I've ever heard anybody have, Merlin Sheldrake. Um, and it really, just lit a fire under my imagination, and I learned so much about different types of fungi and how they interact with other insects and stuff. And then again, I extrapolated it to what would happen if a fungus of this nature were to sort of take root in this small Hudson Valley town and sort of start affecting the people around it. And in the second book was called The Stone Serpent. And in that one, I had a real fascination with the process of petrifaction, which is like Medusa turning people to stone. It's how would that happen in real life? And I found all sorts of real life examples of animals not literally being turned to stone, but they calcify in interesting ways. And so I decided that was going to be sort of the root of the second book. And then with the third book, the mind worms, absolutely. I was just like, these wasps are so cool. I got to do something with them.
How did you come up with the idea of having a medical examiner?
Because I needed somebody who knew science and knew the human body. And also I wanted it to be in a small town because it was important, especially for that first book, that she knows everybody in town so that through her eyes, you can see how they change when they come under the sway of the fungus. Um, and so it's also been a really interesting time researching how things like autopsies are done. It's absolutely gruesome, and I learned very quickly why they really do not want loved ones to be present during the autopsy of a body, because you just don't want to see that. You don't want to see that happen. You don't want to see the body of your loved one. It'll only look like a violation to you, right? So you don't want to see that kind of stuff. But it's fascinating and it's gruesome. And it's one of the reasons actually that I don't know if you know this. I can't remember if I told you about this when I saw you last, but I'm also the co-host of a podcast called Spooky Science Lab. And that also had its genesis in all this crazy research I was doing for these books and finding all of these amazing, strange but true scientific facts that I couldn't use in the books, but was desperate to do something with. So me and my friend David Wellington, who's also a horror and science fiction writer, teamed up, and now we're doing this podcast, and we're actually going to
Wow,
start our second season, I think, in January.
great.
I know.
It's always good to
It's
use things, that you can't use in the book. It's always great to find another place to use them.
absolutely because all I was doing was boring my friends at dinner parties, talking about it at the table. Hey,
Oh,
did you
not
guys know
another
about this
one.
particular kind of fungus? And they're like, yeah, yeah, Nick, whatever.
So do you create your characters first, or do you come up with the storylines first?
I usually come up with a situation first.
Okay.
Not quite the full storyline. That comes through more of an outlining process. It's funny. People always ask, "Are you an outliner or are you a discovery writer, or what they call
Answer.
a plotter or a pantser?" And I'm a plotter, but what people don't necessarily realize is that there's a lot of pantsing going on when you're writing that outline. you're
Okay.
really you're going down all sorts of avenues that may not wind up in the final outline. So it's really, to me, there's no real distinction between the two. But I do like to write outlines because I just don't want to be stuck like staring at a blank screen with a blinking cursor and wondering what I should be doing next. So I usually start with the situation. In this case, with this one, say I just wanted to use that parasitic wasp and
Mhm.
mix it with other things like the melting of the permafrost that's happening in the Arctic Circle, and prehistoric wasps and all this stuff. And then I just sort of rack my brain trying to figure out how it comes together. But that's where the characters come in, because no, you can't just have a story where things happen. Things happen to people, and that's what makes it interesting. So you have to come up with all the characters that things will happen to. And because it's a series, I'm bringing characters along from the first and second books, so I have to sort of focus on what relationships they have with each other, with other characters, and how that has evolved or grown or changed since the last book. So there's actually, even if I do come up with sort of the situation first, there's a lot of character work that goes into the writing of these books.
What is who is your favorite character that you wrote about?
It's a character from the first book. His name is, I want to say, I think his name is Vincent. He's very loosely based on sort of yeah, what's that character from Doonesbury? I,
Okay. Yeah, I know
uh,
what you're talking
yeah,
about.
Doc. It's like Doc from Doonesbury. He's very much like that. He's a he wants to live off the grid. He's a conspiracy theorist. He's very um, just he's very prickly and thinks everything is a political conspiracy. But he was so much fun to write. He was actually a really good character who had a lot of heart. Um, and I think he's my favorite. In the third book, in the Mind Worms, there are these two girls who sort of run away with the book as well. These two teenage girls, so they were a lot of fun too. And I this is why I enjoy focusing on character when I can, because I find, if you can make the characters fun, not just relatable, not just
Mhm.
people that you might sympathize with, but if you can make them fun or funny or just win the reader's heart in some way, I think those are the characters that really resonate and are remembered.
Do you base any of them on people that you know?
Sometimes, not explicitly. I think a lot of them really are based on just facets of my own personality. But I might have a character say something that I overheard a friend say or something along those lines. But I've never specifically based a character on somebody I know or anything along those lines. Um, it would feel weird to me. And I would also be convinced that they would know right away it was them and be upset. So I don't want to do that. I do use my friends' names sometimes, first or last names, just because I'm just terrible at coming up with names. So I'll just like glance at a book near me, and if it's written by a friend, I'll grab their name or. But other than that, no, I don't really. Um, I try not to draw too much from my friends or family.
The best way you can think of to come up with characters.
It's funny. It's an amalgamation really of the situation and what I want, I guess, to happen. Because, like I said, the first book was very much about uh, Dr. Laura seeing the changes in the people around her in the town and sort of and uh, launching her investigation that way. Um, so in those cases, I needed characters to be very quick drawn but recognizable, the townspeople, right? You
Mhm.
need to, this townsperson is a poet, this townsperson is a cab driver, whatever. But you got to give them some sort of personality beyond their job too. And as I mentioned before too, for Dr. Laura, I needed her to be a doctor, to sort of get her into the stories. But I also needed her to be level-headed. I didn't want her to be a character who discovers all this weird and horrific stuff going on and lose her mind or feel helpless or rely on her boyfriend or anything like that. I wanted her to be very much her own person and able to stay level-headed in these times and think things through, right? Even though there's plenty of action scenes and stuff, but she needs to ultimately think things through to find out what's going on and what can be done about it.
Mhm. And your characters, I would assume, would evolve during the story.
Oh yeah, sure.
They revealed themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse.
Yes.
Um, in the second book, there's a new chief of police in this small town, and Laura used to get along really well with the old chief of police, but she's just been butting heads with the new chief of police, who really, for most of the novel, just comes off as a jerk. She's kind of a jerk. And But by the end of the novel, they have sort of a heart to heart, and you realize why this new chief of police has been acting the way she has been acting, why she's been so hard on Laura and everyone else around her. And my hope is that through a scene like that, you start to have a little more of an understanding of her, a little more of compassion for her, and that you won't just go through the novel thinking she's an antagonist and hating her.
Mhm.
So that kind of stuff is fun. I love doing that because I love reading that.
Mhm.
I think every writer tries to emulate the things that they enjoy reading, and I certainly enjoy when I read about a character who I think is being a jerk, and then you discover why they're acting that way, and it's more sympathetic.
And do you like writing a lot of dialogue?
I do, and if I say so myself, I think I've gotten better at it over the years.
Okay.
You know, like a lot of writers, when I first started out, my dialogue was very exposition heavy. You know, it's very much people were just saying what they needed to say to make the scene happen or to push the story forward. It took a lot of practice and a lot of writing to come to the point where I realized, um, or was able to get their personality to come out through dialogue, to get their humor to come out through, or lack of humor to come out through their dialogue. So
Mhm.
I do enjoy it now. I used to be also a very description heavy writer, and I've sort of learned again over my 24 years of being a professional writer, I've learned how to keep things moving in a way where you give just enough description to set the scene in the reader's mind. They don't necessarily need to know what color a bedspread is, you know. But when I was first starting out, I was just focusing on all the wrong details. Um, so much like with that, I've learned how to focus on better dialogue, really letting their personalities come out, not just the plot points.
Okay. So, what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out your latest book, the
Biggest
Mind Worm?
challenge, the biggest challenge for the latest book was the biggest challenge for every book I've written, which is really just getting started. Even if I've got an outline all set, sitting down and typing chapter one and trying to get into the scene, for some reason, there's always a little bit of like, maybe it's just nervousness. Even after all these years, I get nervous. Do I still have what it takes? Am I going to be able to write this book? That kind of thing. And the answer is always the same, even though I learned it again every time and then seem to forget it, which is that the book becomes itself. The book becomes good in the writing. It's not just gonna it's not gonna sit in your head and become perfect and then you transcribe it down. You have to actually start putting words on the page or putting words on the screen, as it were, um, for it to sort of take its shape and for you to be able to work on it and make it the best it can be. This happens with short stories for me. This happens with novels for me. It's a lesson I have to learn over and over again. And I'm so jealous of people who can be like, well, I finished this novel yesterday and I'm starting a new today. Like, wow, I wish I wish I could do that. Um, and I hope someday that I will be able to. I'm a bit of a slow writer. I think the Mindworms took me almost a year to write from start to finish, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things is not a big deal. But I think as a fast-paced thriller, it should maybe shouldn't have taken as long as it did. But I have no complaints because it came out. I think it came out really well. And I guess if it took that long to make it come out well, so be it.
So, did you write the first draft straight through, or did you um, edit it along the way?
I don't do major edits along the way. So what I do is I'll write a chapter and then I'll look it over when I'm done, just sort of polish it up, give it a slight polish, and then I'll move on to the next chapter. So I do sort of move all the way through, but I will sort of also review the chapters that I've finished. It's not until I have the first draft completed that I'll sit down and really go through it and try to like, you know, not just on a word by word basis, but also like try to make things make sense. Because sometimes I realize like in chapter 10, I've done something that really needs to be set up in chapter 4, but I didn't. So I need to add that kind of thing. But and that's the part of writing that I really enjoy. I think the magic of writing, for me at least, comes out in the revisions. I find rough drafts to be a slog. I don't enjoy rough drafting. I'm always second guessing myself. I'm always thinking, oh, this is terrible. You know, if my wife were here right now, she could confirm that all I do is sigh heavily and think that this will never work. But it's all part of my process, I guess. And once I get to that second draft where it's down on paper, and now I can play with it and change its form and really make it shine. That's the part I really love.
Hmm. It sounds so, at first, when you first start a book, it sounds as though you have a little bit of self-doubt.
Always, yes, always. And I
Yeah,
think that's something a lot of creative people struggle with all the
yeah.
time. Like, sure, I've written, I don't know, how a dozen published novels at this point. But what if I've lost that power now? What if I've lost that ability? What if this is the novel where what if I've used it up, right? And this is the novel where everyone will see what a fraud I am. We all have that from time to time. And
Doesn't go away.
it's something you wrestle with probably with or something I wrestle with every project. But I got to struggle through it because frankly, I don't know what else I would do if I wasn't a writer. I don't have any office skills. I don't know how to work Excel. Do people even use Excel in offices anymore? I don't know.
Yep. Several authors have mentioned that they have self-doubt, and even
Yeah,
authors that have written many, even bestsellers and things, they have self-doubt. It's like
yeah,
it's part of the writing process.
it really is. I'm good friends with Chris Golden, who is a New York Times
Yep.
best-selling author, and he goes through the same thing that we all do. Whether you're a New York Times best-selling author with 100 books like Chris, or you're just starting out, that this imposter syndrome will hangs over all of
Yep.
us.
Yep. So what can we expect from you in the near future?
Well, I'm focusing on the second season of the podcast right now. I'm writing up some scripts with more uh, strange but true science. And then I actually am going to start work on a commercial thriller. It's going to be a little less of a horror novel, a little more of just a regular thriller. But because it's me, there's still elements of horror in it. I don't think I can fully excise horror from anything I write. So this one's going to be a little bit of a sort of, and then there were none mystery thriller that takes place at a rest stop on the side of a highway that's during a huge storm. So like a whole busload of people are trapped there, and the roads are flooded, and they can't get out. And uh, somebody may not be who they said they were, and the bodies start to pile up.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Oh, okay. Now I have some questions for you about being a writer.
Okay, sure.
What's your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
This is going to sound so silly, but I love when a novel is done.
That's what so many people have said.
Really? Okay, good. So I don't feel bad then.
No, it's
If
not silly at all.
the creative, I mean, obviously there's something I love about the creative process, or I wouldn't be doing it. But it can be difficult. It can be challenging. It can really set you off on a spiral of self-doubt. But when that novel is finished, or at least even just that first draft is finished, there's such a feeling of accomplishment and a feeling of, yes, I do belong here as a writer. This is what I do. This is maybe the only thing I know how to do, right? So I love that feeling of a novel is done. But then there's also that comes with a little bit of anxiety as well. Will it get published? Will it find the right publisher, the right editor, etc.? So I guess my favorite thing as a writer is really when the book comes out, right? When it's finally published and I get to hold it in my greedy little hands and show it to the world and hope it finds its audience.
Mhm. Okay. And what do you consider the most challenging part of the whole writing process? And how do you overcome it?
I would go back to that earlier answer of just starting the process. I really do find that the most challenging, and I overcome it just you know after nearly 25 years of doing this professionally. I overcome it just by pushing past it because I know now, I recognize it now as part of uh, a pattern. That it always happens. But if someone's like a newer writer and they don't yet understand that this is just something that happens every time you start a project, um, my advice would really just be to do your best to push past it. Put one word down on the screen, any word. It could be the or and or goblin or whatever whatever word you want. Just put a word down on that document, and suddenly I think you will free yourself up, and it'll really start to flow. It's I don't know what it is, but I know that it affects a lot of writers like myself who are just like that blank page at the start of writing a project is so, even if you have an outline ready to go, it's so daunting. So yeah, just putting any word down and knowing that it's a first draft, and that you can change all the words later. You don't have to even keep the words that you put down on the page that day. Just write anything to get into the story. And once you do, I think the juices start flowing. So that's really what I do. I don't write a random word anymore. Like, but but uh but just pushing forward and knowing, trusting that those creative juices will flow once I actually start putting words in the document.
Hey, so what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
How would you define adventure?
I would say just something that you were really thrilled about doing, or
Oh, okay. Um, I guess it was the writing of this book. This is 100 Fathoms Below, written by me and Stephen L. Kent. It's the, vampires on a submarine book. Um, I had never met Stephen when we started working on this. He was a client of my agent's, and he needed somebody to help write this book because he's a very busy journalist. So he had this idea for the book, but he just didn't have time really to put it together. So he brought me on board through our shared agent, and it was a fascinating experience to write. I don't want to say someone else's story because I certainly put enough of myself into it as well. But just to collaborate with somebody was really really interesting. It wasn't always great. You know, when you're a writer, you put so much of yourself and your emotion into your ideas, and if the other person that you're collaborating with doesn't like that idea, it can sting a little, you know. But we got through that, and the book came out, and it did okay. But then I think it was in January of 2021, I just wrote a jokey little tweet about the book, saying, my apologies to the Goodreads reviewer who found my novel about vampires on a submarine unrealistic. And that tweet took off. It went viral. It was retweeted, quote tweeted, liked hundreds of thousands of times. And as a result, the book became a bestseller on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all that stuff. So I think that was weird and that was unexpected, but I think that was the best adventure, was watching just this silly book take off because of a dumb tweet.
amazing. Wow. You just never know.
You never know. You know, if I hadn't written that tweet, like if I had said, "Oh, that's a dumb idea for a tweet, I'm not going to write it," everything would have been different.
Yep.
Nobody would have, nobody would have heard of this book. It wouldn't. Yeah, it just. So who knows? You never know. I guess the moral of the story is always write that dumb tweet.
Or that dumb X.
Right, right. Well, I'm not on Twitter or X anymore, but
Yeah.
it definitely was a fun adventure. That's for sure.
Wow. That's great. So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned during your writing career?
Perseverance. Whenever I talk with newer writers and they want any bit of advice, it always comes down to perseverance. I tell them that the first book you write, or the 12th book you write, it's not going to come out perfect the first time, and even if you work it and work it and work it, it just may not be the book that hits. It may not be the book that sells. Just keep going, keep trying. And I also make sure that people understand that writing is like any muscle. It's going to get better the more you do it. And so don't expect to be perfect right out of the gate. And just, you got to keep at it. And so that's what I learned, and that's what I pass along. There's this idea sometimes, because writing is also a creative art,
Mhm.
that it's like I don't know, it's the muse, and it's you're just naturally good at it or whatever. And it's not the case at all. You got to really, like anything, you have to practice and stick with it to become good at it and to get better at it. And I feel like I get better with each book I write. And I've been, like I said, I've been doing this for almost 25 years now, and I'm still learning so much, and I'm still growing as a writer. And so that's the lesson. That's the lesson right there. Is just keep doing it.
Okay, and do you have any other advice you'd like to give to other writers?
This may sound outdated, but I would really tell people to try to get paid. Get paid. A lot of writers are, a lot of folks like newer writers. They're going right to self-publishing, and sometimes that works. Sometimes their book hits it, and sometimes it doesn't, and just sort of languishes. Um, but again, this may be outdated, but I feel like working with a traditional publisher has gotten me more of a career than just having a book out. So, and it has also given me an income. I mean, it's not a great income. I'm not a New York Times bestselling author, and even if I were, I think my income would not be as great as people imagine. So I'm very lucky to have a spouse with a full-time job and a steady paycheck and
Mhm.
insurance that covers us both. Um, but I still feel like work is worth your time, and because it's worth your time, it's worth money. So I would always tell people to try to get paid, even if they can't. Like, if it's your first story and you send it to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, odds are they're probably not going to pick it up, but they might. So take the risk, try, see what happens. If you've written a novel, and let's say Tor Nightfire is having an open submissions period where they will look at unsolicited novels. Send it. Don't 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 reject yourself before they have a chance to reject you.
Good
That's the
advice.
big one. Don't reject yourself. That's what it all comes down to. Don't reject yourself before anyone has a chance to even see what you've created.
Okay. Are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that might have helped you in your career?
I'm not much of a joiner these days, so I'm not sure. Um, I hear people say good things about SIFWA, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers, or MWA, the Mystery Writers of America. I don't know. I was a member of the HWA for a while, but it wasn't really my scene. Um, so in terms of groups, I'm not sure. Uh, but there's also the possibility, certainly, of putting your own group together. Let's say you have other writer friends whose tastes you appreciate, who you think have good taste, and whose work you like, and you can all get together and create a writers group and show each other your work and critique each other's work, and grow together as writers. And I think that's really something that's worth doing.
Mhm. Good point. All right, now I have questions about you as a person.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, here it comes. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Gosh, I'm not sure. I feel like such an open book sometimes, because um, I'm very public on social media and stuff like that. One thing that they don't know about me, um, I'll have to get back to you on that one. I'm not sure. I'm sorry to give such a blah answer. Um,
That's okay. You don't have to.
oh, you
Uh,
know what? One thing that they may not know about me, because I'm a horror writer, and because I love horror movies and all this stuff. People may not know that I also have a deep love of comedy. So I love comedy movies, comedy TV shows. Right now, I'm watching a sitcom called Abbott Elementary, which I think is
yeah.
fantastic. Um, I like musicals. So I don't know. I don't know if this really counts as that interesting, but I think those are things people may not know about me, is that I like
Yep.
comedies and musicals, and I guess musical comedies.
Yeah, sometimes people might think that horror authors are, really serious all the time, and they're like very weird and not.
We're not. No, we're pretty normal, and we're pretty friendly, and we have tastes outside of horror for the most part too. And so I think that's
Absolutely. Okay. So, what is or are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time to do the things that you love?
I love reading, which is probably not an unusual answer for any writer.
No.
I do love reading. Making time for reading can be difficult. And I really should do a better job of it. So I live in New York City, and I tend to do most of my reading when I'm on the subway. If I'm on the subway somewhere, that's where I'll get my reading done, or get a few chapters in, and then I'll read right at bedtime. But I'm usually pretty tired, so I only get through maybe one chapter, two if I'm lucky. So it can take me a while to get through a book. Uh, if it's a big book like Stephen King's It or something, I think took me 2 months to get through. But even if it's a regular size book, it can take me anywhere from 3 weeks to a month to get through, because I'm just not great at making reading time. And it's something I do want to work on. And actually, during lockdown, I started to spend every morning reading for half an hour to an hour before even logging on to social media or whatever. I'd get up, we'd feed the cats, and I would sit down with a book and just like read for 45 minutes, let's say. And that was great. That was really good. And I realized I don't need to be on social media first thing in the morning. I don't need to be checking my phone or whatever. I can actually read and enjoy myself and take a minute to just sort of exist. And I've been thinking about getting back to that, and I think that will also help me get through books faster.
Hmm. Okay. And you just sort of answered one of my other questions, which is writers very often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work. And do you have any, and do they help or hinder you?
Um, we have two cats.
That's
They're both well known on social media because I'm always posting pictures and talking about them. There's a King Meow, who is a orange tabby. He's about 5 years old now. He came to us with the name King Meow, and we decided we were going to keep it because we just thought it was adorable. And then there's his sister slash girlfriend, Noodle, who we just adopted recently, and they became fast friends. They're both very cat oriented cats, so they became fast friends. They're partners in crime. Uh, Noodle will clean up after King Meow when he uses the litter box, and then sometimes we will actually see them sort of nuzzling and snuggling, and
oh,
it's very cute and very weird because I've never seen a cat clean up after another cat before. So yes,
uh,
and I think they are helpful, not hindering. Though I did close the office door before I started this interview, because I knew that they would be in the way. They would be crawling all over me. They'd be getting in front of the camera. But overall, I think they're much more helpful. There are fur babies. They are creatures who rely on us and always give us a reason to come home.
hmm. Okay. Now, what does your office look like? What does your writing space look like?
Small and cramped. We're very lucky that we have basically it was listed as another bedroom, but it's very small. And so we're lucky to have this in our apartment, which itself, our apartment's only 605 square feet, so that's really
Wow.
small. And certainly that was difficult during lockdown when my wife and I were both here together. We didn't kill each other, so that's good. Or really, she didn't kill me, so that's good. I was happy to have her here. I don't know if she was as happy to have me around all the time. But So it's small, it's crowded, but I don't necessarily feel like I have to work in this space. One thing I like to do, and this was pre-pandemic, pre-lockdown, but I'd like to sort of get back in the habit of it, is I used to write all the time at the New York Public Library, the main branch, what I call the Ghostbusters branch, with the lions out front. And I've been back a few times to write there since lockdown ended, however many years ago, and I'd like to do that more often. So, and also, as strange as it may sound, I like having a commute that separates home life from work. and writing is work. Um, so as much as convenient as it is to have a home office, and I have written a lot here, I also like being able to separate them like that, and just get into have time to get into a different headspace, have time to do some reading on the subway before I get to the library, that sort of thing. So I feel like I'm very flexible when it comes to my work area.
That makes sense, though. When you're working at home, do you like silence or would you rather listen to music? And if you like to listen to music, what kind?
I go through phases. There are times when I'm just sitting here in silence, listening to the cats play or cars honk outside. And there are other times when I'm listening to music. And when I do listen to music, I prefer listening to things that don't have like lyrics or anything that would distract me. So movie soundtracks are good for that. Um, uh, I like this weird thing that I've discovered recently called dark synth, which is all synthesizer type
Oh,
music, but it's got sort of a dark edge to it. It's very similar to like what John Carpenter does in his movies with soundtracks. And there's another thing that I discovered called dark ambient music, which is really just sort of this low drone, but it gets me in the mood, right? And it sort of cuts out the outside world, and I can really sort of focus. So especially when I'm at the library, I like to listen to music, to that kind of stuff. Every once
hmm.
in a while, I'll put on like my 1980s Pandora radio station and hear like actual songs, but mostly I prefer music that does not have lyrics.
Okay, that sounds good. And do you have to have any kind of drink or food with you when you're writing?
No, no.
No coffee?
Um, No, I drink coffee in the morning, but not when I'm writing. I do most of my writing actually in the afternoons. I know so many writers who um, do their best writing first thing in the morning. They get up, they just write for half an hour or an hour, and that's how they get their writing done for the day. For whatever reason, that was never my process. I'm just not able to do that. I usually start writing after lunch, right until around dinner time. Um, but I don't necessarily need I might have a bottle of Diet Coke here or a glass of water or something, but generally it's not a part of the whole. It's not a part of the ritual of writing.
Okay, sounds good. Now, I have two more questions. Where can people find your books aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I have to do a plug for Annie's. You can get Nicholas's books at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. So where else can people find your books?
I don't know if you remember a time when they used to advertise books on television. And they would always the commercial would end with them saying wherever fine books are sold, and so that's what that's what I like to say. Where can people find my books? Wherever fine books are sold. But obviously, a lot of people these days shop for their books online, so they can find them at the usual places there as well. But I'd really love it if they went to Annie's Bookstop and got it from you guys. I love independent bookstores. Annie's has been around for a good long time, and I'd love for it to be around for a good more long time. Um, so I always tell people to try to order books from their local independent bookstore.
Great, thank you. And my last question, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Oh, my awesomeness. Thank you. Yeah, well, there's my website, nicholaskaufmann.com. Don't forget that second N at the end of Kaufman. If you go to nicholaskaufmann.com with one N, I don't know what you're going to find, probably cat pictures, but they won't be my cats. And then I'm also you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Blue Sky, you can find me on Instagram. And Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn if anyone uses LinkedIn. Yeah, you can find me at any of those places. Just put in Nicholas Kaufman and you'll find me.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, thank you, Nicholas. It was
Thank
great speaking
you.
with you,
This was
and
wonderful. I
it,
appreciate it.
it was great. And hopefully, you will do well with the mind worms. And
Thanks.
it's an interesting book.
Oh, thank you. Uh, yes, like I said, it's pretty gruesome.
It is gruesome. Thanks very much, and we will be speaking.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it.